everybody, my name is Sorita DSD. I'm a priestess, an author, a researcher, a publisher, a teacher, a mum, a slave to a cat, and many other things. So I would like to welcome you to this presentation and talk that I am presenting for the Goddess Conference 2023 here in Glastonbury. And my subject is the Goddess Hekate. And in this presentation, we'll be looking at images of this Goddess of the Crossroads throughout the ages, as well as some of our close association. It's my hope that by looking at these images, I will be able to illustrate to you that Hekate was not a Crone goddess prior to the 20th century. A little bit kind of shocking because it's something that is still repeated in some books, and it's something that started out in the 20th century. So a recent development in a very long history for one of the most primordial and ancient goddesses that we've got information on. So a little bit about myself. I'm a priestess, I'm an author, I'm a researcher, I'm a devotee of the Goddess Hekate, which is part of my work and devotion as a polytheist. I believe in many gods and goddesses, and I honor many gods and goddesses. My work includes Circle for Hekate, Hekate Liminal Rites, Artemis, Goddess of the Sun and Moon, and around 30 other titles that I have authored, co-authored, or otherwise contributed to. Some of you might know me as the founder of the Covenant of Hekate. It's an organization that was started in 2010 that brings together Hekate devotees from different traditions in different parts of the world to share their experiences and ideas with one another, and through that create a community of peers where people can learn from one another. And it has grown exponentially over the last decade or so, with an interest in this goddess surging. Some people saying that she's now the most popular goddess. I also just want to apologize if I go too fast. I'm showing you too many images. You want to kind of read the things on screen a little bit longer for yourself. Please feel free to pause this recording. It's the wonders of an electronic presentation. So feel free to use the pause button so that you can spend more time with each of the images or descriptions should you choose to. Unfortunately, I've tried to pack in a lot, but I hope that you understand and enjoy. Let's continue. So for those of you that are very new to the Goddess Hekate, let's go over some of the basics. We know her today as a witch goddess and a goddess of magic, but she was also depicted in different ways at different times. A triple goddess, a single-bodied goddess, equally important, equally commonly found, possibly the single-bodied being the older form. She's also described and depicted as animal-headed, a double and quadruple goddess at times, and sometimes even as an invisible goddess or a pillar of lights. Hekate was called the many-named mother of the gods, even in the very late pagan period. So Hekate's got this image problem that I've already mentioned. She's described as a kind of dark goddess and a crone goddess, and her association with the dead and necromancy is often highlighted. And so today I'm not going to touch very much on that. I'm literally just going to look at historical descriptions of her. But I would like to just bring into perspective reasons why deities, especially goddesses of great power, were sometimes maligned by incoming religions. We've got deities being discredited because this helps to force conversion when an incoming religion wants to force their ways on the population. So discrediting their deities, making their priesthoods into kind of false prophets of some sort. It all helps to establish a new religion, demonizing the deities of the older religions by calling them devils and witches. It's a very typical technique employed. Defamation and mockery, destruction of their sacred sites and their images, of course. Appropriation and assimilation. We often see newer religions building their churches or their temples upon the remains of an older one, destroying but continuing the worship. And sometimes the worship is continued in a more syncretic way, and in other times it literally destroys it. And then, of course, the destruction or suppression of literature, burning books, etc. So regardless of all these attempts, Hekate, like many of the other gods and goddesses, managed to survive. We know a lot about her. We're discovering more as time goes by. And as more literature and archaeological evidence emerges over the passage of time, I'm sure in the future we will know more about her. But regardless of all the attempts that were made, she found a way to survive through the hearts of poets and writers and artists, again, like many of the other very powerful goddesses, Venus, Aphrodite. You just have to look and you'll find these evidences scattered. So Hekate in antiquity, she was associated with the goddess Kybele, goddess of the Phrygian mysteries, the Phrygian great mother goddess. And here is a study showing Kybele in the center, with Hekate with her torches on the right, and the god Hermes, the messenger of the gods, on the left. And this was found in Olbia, Italy. We move on. Another example, again, with Kybele seated in the center. Here she's got her drum. And again, on the right-hand side, this time in miniature, there's Hekate, and on the left, the god Hermes. These two gods, as you will see in a moment, also had an important role in the Eleusinian mysteries. And here, just for you that couldn't quite make out, you can see Hekate here holding her two torches aloft. The torches being very much a symbol of her bringing light to the darkness and also leading and protecting and guiding, as well as weapons that she uses to fight and protect. So Hekate is also closely associated with the Ephesian goddess, the Ephesian Artemis, or sometimes she's called the Ephesian Diana. And of course, both Diana and Artemis are goddesses who were closely associated with Hekate as goddesses that were syncretic with her. These goddesses' histories and worship were often kind of assimilated into one another. They were often equated to each other. They were seen by some as being exactly the same. They may have been at times, and maybe they weren't, but it was something that we see a lot. At Artemis's temple in Ephesus, we find that it was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the only of these wonders that were named for a goddess. She was a significant goddess, and she's also mentioned several times in the Bible. At her temple, there was also a sanctuary to Hekate that played a very important part in many historical events. Here I am on one of my first visits to the site, just to show you that there's very little left there. Unlike the glories of the city of Ephesus that have been restored, the site was looted even thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, and very little remains there, and no major excavations have been done there in recent years. So hopefully it will receive more attention. Again, Hekate being associated with the god Hermes. We can see him here with his winged helmet on the left-hand side standing, and Hekate in the center with her 2 torches on this vase. And on the right-hand side behind Hekate, we find the Grain Goddess Mother, the Grain Goddess Demeter, the Holy Mother, waiting for the return of her daughter Persephone from the underworld. Of course, a famous story and one we should all be familiar with. The story is that Persephone was kidnapped or taken by the god Hades, who was the god of the underworld, to become his queen. And it's an interesting story because it also suffers from mistranslations sometimes in modern English, but a fantastic story to learn about the insights and the themes at the Eleusinian mysteries, which were perhaps the most important of the mystery traditions, the mystery cults, the initiations we received into the mother goddess cult and traditions and worship in antiquity. So again, we can see right on the right-hand side, Hekate leading Persephone in and out of the underworld. She had a really important role in this story, really important. Hekate, in addition to being shown single-bodied with torches, she was also depicted as a triple goddess, and is this form that we are more familiar with these days. It's talked about more. When it's a triple goddess, she's always standing around a central pillar, back to back, or if it's in relief, they're next to each other, but with a slight indication of this pillar behind them. So that drawing was based on this actual statue that's in the British Museum collection. It's a Roman statue, quite a late statue. Unfortunately, not on permanent display. Myself and a friend have been working to campaign that it should be put onto permanent display after it was shown as on an exhibition in 2022. But typically you see this image with the three bodies standing back to back, holding different objects, and again, the central pillar. This pillar could be a survival of the Near Eastern cult of the pole goddess or tree goddesses. It's a very ancient tradition that some of you may well be familiar with. Sometimes she's also crowned with different headdresses that each has a different meaning, as does the objects that she holds. They usually include torches, snakes, whips, cords, keys, daggers, but also sometimes votive offering vessels or a pomegranate, etc. What is important is that these items that she holds, like with any of the other gods, and the items that she's associated with or accompanied with, like Hekate is often associated with the dogs accompanying her, just like they accompany some forms of Artemis, that these are part of a symbolic language, a language that if we learn it correctly, like any other language, we are able to communicate with the person or the entity in this case that uses that language. And in return, if we can understand it, they are more able to communicate with us the meanings and intentions behind, in the case of deities, dreams and visions and oracles, for example. So learning about the symbolism and learning how to interpret it as much as we can within the context of the time is really a very important part of the devotion for me of this ancient goddess and the deities I serve. So here we've got a collection of many different images of Hekate that I've just grabbed together slightly at random, just to show you that she was depicted in this triple form with this pillar type thing behind her in many different occasions, but also in different styles, because we're dealing with a very long period of history. And if we think of 1970s fashion versus 2023 fashion, we can see that there are clear differences. And, you know, rah-rah skirts in the 80s, who knows, maybe they will become a thing again. But just like that, we find that deities are often shown in a style that is something to do with the era that they're born in. And just like today, when we sometimes hanker back to ancient times or previous generation or bring something back in fashion, some statues were made in the style of older statues to make them look older. It was quite a practice. So what we're going to do now is have a little timeline of both descriptions of the goddess Hekate, revealing something of her nature and how she was viewed, how she was physically seen, how she presented herself to her devotees. And we're going to do this in chronological order, starting with the oldest, going to some of the most modern ones. Of course, there's going to be big gaps in as I go through this, because there's periods that we just have more information, but there's also a time restriction. I'm trying to fit in as much as I can. So again, remember, you can pause and go through things a little slower. Some of this has been drawn from an anthology I edited called Hekate as Sacrifice, which was published in 2010. In that, I brought together the experiences and visions of around 50 devotees of Hekate from around the world, male, female, from all kinds of different traditions, witches, priestesses, devotees, people that have other interests. And it's fascinating to see the things that are coherent and where you recognize things coming through from the ancient worlds, even when the person writing and sharing that experience didn't necessarily know that it had an ancient root. So a fascinating book if you're interested in the experiences of people. I've also drawn a little bit from my book Hekate Liminal Rites and Circle for Hekate, because naturally that's my work. And so let's go. The Theogony is the oldest known text that we've got that brings together the story of the Hellenistic gods and goddesses. And it was written by a man called Hesiod, who was inspired by his muses to write many texts that seem to survive into the present day. In it, Hesiod tells the story of the gods, and he highlights the goddess Hekate as a goddess who is honored by Zeus, the king of the gods, who's just taken his place and overthrown the oppressive regime of his father. And he elevates Hekate and says Zeus honors her above all others. We find out that she's also honored by the other immortal gods, by the other gods, and also that she continues to have a share of the things that she had from the beginning, and that she got a share of the earth, the sea, and also the starry heavens, as is her birthright. And it's unusual because he highlights that she was an only child. There's a lot of things about Hekate that's unusual. She's also a goddess that's never married off or paired exclusively in a romantic way with another male deity. She's very specific like that. She is one of the virgin or maiden goddesses like Artemis and Vesta. So we move on. Just a few decades later, we've got Homer's writing describing Hekate as tender-hearted, bright-quiffed, and also as being from a cave. The oldest known image we've got of Hekate is in this style, which might be surprising to those of you only familiar with her triple images, which is shown very much in the same style as the Phrygian Great Mother Kybele. She's seated and demure, like Demeter is as well, of course. And this was found in Athens and dates to about 600 BCE. In the same era, we find the oldest known altar inscription to Hekate, which was near the Temple of Apollo in Didyma Militis. You can still visit Didyma today. Didyma is a fantastic, especially if you go to the old town, it's a lovely place to stay and explore the oracular temple of Apollo there, where women predicted the future of pilgrims as they arrived, and Hekate was worshipped there also on the sacred road connecting the city to the temple, a very significant role. In the decades that follow, we find this rather peculiar incident where we've got the cult of the empty thrones, and this particular example is on Halki and has, unfortunately can't see it very clearly, but by the seats towards the bottom, the names Zeus, as we look at it on the left, and Hekate on the right. These, we don't know exactly how they were used. The scarves that you can see on them were devotional offerings left by my partner when he took the photograph. And it's believed that Hekate and Zeus might have been worshipped here as invisible deities. There are other examples of worship like this, or that effigies were placed on the thrones, which simply don't know. They're slightly smaller than modern human size. The first triple images of Hekate starts emerging around 500 BCE, and the oldest, according to Pausanias, was believed to have been made by a famous sculptor called Alcmenes. And this stood at the Parthenon in Athens as you come up, and it stood next to the statue of the wingless Nike, a very prominent position outside of the entranceway, which is significant in its own right because there are various sanctuaries and evidences for Hecate's worship in the ancient Agora. And we know that she was a very popular goddess in Athens. Just to show that the images of the single goddess continued, we've got Hekate with her headband and her torches here on this vase. We get Hekate described as being before the portal of the royal halls. The goddess stands before the gate, but even at the royal halls, she was an important goddess who could provide protection and purification for those who entered through. And she's also called Despoina. So we've also got Sophocles writing about Hekate in connection to Helios, Helios being the god of the sun, and Hekate having the spear of the crossroads, highlighting her connection with crossroads, and also describing her as a goddess who dwells in the triple ways that is crowned with oak leaves and the coils of wild serpents. And this is significant when we look at Medea, Medea being the most famous witch or sorceress from the ancient world, alongside, of course, Circe. And in a familial way, Circe was the aunt of Medea. Circe's brother was Medea's father, Aeetes. And they had another sister called Pasiphae, and Pasiphae became the queen of King Minos over on Crete. So she was also a significant figure in her own right. And this Cretan connection is very interesting. Not a lot of evidence to support some of the theories that I might have, but I think if we tie things together, there are some good evidences to suggest that Hekate was quite likely worshipped in the kind of ancient Mycenaean period in Crete, or what we call Crete now as well. Medea was a devotee of Hekate. She was a priestess, an example of a woman who has been named as a witch, and an evil witch at that, not only in modern literature, but also by writers writing about her in the ancient world. She was a foreigner to Greece, so this might be one reason she was maligned. In addition to this, she was a powerful and very educated woman. She was the daughter of a king, and it's said that Hekate herself taught her the craft of magic, and especially the use of plants and plant medicine. So she later on, after the story with Jason and the Argonauts, in which she plays a really important role, I'm always going to add this because I really want people to start looking into her a lot more and realize that she wasn't just this evil witch that she's been made out to be. She also became the queen of Athens, marrying the king there. And when that king decided he wanted to move on to another woman, as they did and probably still sometimes do, she basically fled with her son, and a tribe was founded around them, the Medes tribe. This tribe was mentioned in the Bible and later became assimilated into Persia because it was a neighboring state. Hekate, very popular in Athens, as I said, and in Aristophanes, he talks that every citizen would have a tribunal. This is something slightly different, but he's comparing it to the altars of Hekate, which apparently was so popular that most houses in Athens had one by the entranceway or by their porches. Here we've got Hippocrates writing about Hekate in 400 BCE, and he's talking about a belief here in this quote that was taught by what he believed false medicine men in the marketplace, selling charms and cures that he did not believe to be efficient. And he basically dismisses this idea, but all the same, it's an interesting idea that this was something ascribed to Hekate, that she could send bad dreams, because she is a goddess of dream oracles and dreams as well. We find that throughout her history. In 300 BCE, we've got this image was made in Aegina. Aegina is a little island off the coast of Athens, and here, according to Pausanias, there was a temple established at this point already in 300 BC, already established for hundreds of years, that was also founded by Orpheus, like the Eleusinian mysteries and the mysteries of Samothrace, and that it was here that Hekate had a very important cult. Unfortunately, nothing at this point has revealed exactly which temple this would have been, because Aegina suffered of a very excited early Christian community that decided to destroy and remove all the pagan worship there. So just a close-up of that image. You can see the three images here in this relief, very clearly the same kind of age, the middle one damaged through the passage of time or maybe deliberately. But again, on her head here, she's wearing a calathos. It's a representation of an agricultural basket linking Hekate to the growth cycles and harvest. We've got around the same era, this quote of Hekate linking her to the baying of night and giving us a little bit of insight into particular worship where she was worshipped with torches. And again, highlighting she's the three-formed goddess and that she was an attendant and all these kinds of things that we can glimpse from history. Then we move on to two very interesting images. This first one, the quality is not that great, I'm sorry. It's from Varna in Bulgaria. We believe it's in that museum there, but I've not been able to personally verify that. And here we still see Hekate accompanied by a dog and a torch, but she's holding a baby. And this is possibly the reason that she's been equated frequently with the goddess Isis, the asset of ancient Egypt. And also why she was called Korathropos, which is the child's nurse, the goddess who looks after the young, and why there are stories linking her to two very special babies. So this is the second example. This one is a little bit more damaged, but we can see the baby and the dog down by the bottom. This one in the Sofia Archaeological Museum in Bulgaria. I took this photo myself. And we believe that the baby that she's holding might be Zeus or Dionysus. So Zeus, very significantly, of course, his mother Rhea swaddled him and presented the father, Kronos, with a stone swaddled in baby fabrics so that Kronos swallowed the stone rather than the baby. It's a big story if you're not familiar with it, but Kronos went a bit crazy and swallowed all his wife's babies because he was worried that one of the babies would later usurp him. And so it came to pass that Zeus did later usurp him, and Hekate, in her role as birth goddess, has a significant connection there. We also see this connection between the baby Zeus and Hekate at a temple in Lagina. Likewise, it's possible that this, especially because this is from the Thracian regions, could have been the baby Dionysus, who was thrice born and very important in the Orphic mysteries. Then we've got an image from the time of Alexander the Great, who conquered vast areas of the world and expanded his empire. One of his provinces was Bactria, which is where Afghanistan, Pakistan is today. And this was a short-lived province in the greater scheme of things, but during the time that it was a Greek province, this coin was issued showing the god Zeus presenting the goddess Hekate upon his hands, like he would in other areas, the goddess Nike Victory. So significant because it reminds us of those thrones of Hekate and Zeus, really showing that he places her in a different position from a wife. And also that very first mention saying that he honors her above all others. And this, of course, being about 400 years later, already 500 years later. Hecate's association with the Phrygian Kybele continued, and we find this bronze matrix from around 150 BCE showing Kybele on the top left with the lions and Hekate with the torches on the top right. And we've also seen the star and the moon motif that we see so often associated with Hekate as the torchbearer, or Artemis Phosphorus as the torchbearer, which is where Hekate and Artemis becomes a little bit kind of entangled as they do in different places. Of course, Hekate does have association with the restless dead, but in this instance, appearing as she does on a stele of a couple that was buried together, husband and wife, we can assume that these people were actually devotees of Hekate and the other deities that surround her here in the center of this grave stele, which is in the Archaeological Museum in Istanbul. Then in 100 BCE, this coin is one of many coins showing the goddess Hekate from especially the Caria region of Anatolia. This one shows Hekate riding a lion, and she's got her veil kind of billowing around her. This is a symbol of her association with the oracles, but also with the moon. And this coin was issued in the city of Stratonikia, which was her ancient city. She was a tutelary goddess there, and the city was connected by a sacred road to her best-known temple, the Temple of Hekate at Legina. So, in the century that passed, Hekate is called on by Ovid in Metamorphoses, and he again emphasizes the three directions and the crossroads connection that she has. We've got Plutarch talking about her, connecting her with the dog sacrifices that were sometimes left at the crossroads. These were mostly purificatory offerings, but they were left as food, and it was said that the foods that were left, which weren't just dogs, a lot of it was breads and cakes and something resembling what we might call a kind of quiche or something today with egg and onion, as well as sweet cakes, were left at the crossroads, and that the poor would take them as soon as it was left. And some people have interpreted that as an ancient form of the rich giving to the poor, but through the method of Hekate. And of course, the poor that lived outside of the city walls in those times were literally the destitute, people with diseases, disabilities, and those that are outcasts in other ways. Then the Orphic hymn to Hekate is part of the opening hymn in the Orphic hymns, which is a large body of hymns to the gods and goddesses in a very particular order. And Hekate is referenced throughout it in some of the other hymns, but it's a beautiful hymn. Go and read it, go and exclaim it. She's called the saffron-cloaked goddess of the heavens, the underworld and the sea, bringing to life the same words put down by Hesiod in the Theogony around 1,000 years before the Orphic hymns. The Orphic tradition, of course, much older than the Orphic hymns. We don't know exactly when the Orphic hymns originated, but the Orphic tradition dates back to the time of Orpheus to around 1200 BCE. And a very different culture. Orpheus became a wanderer, initiated, and became a devotee of the great mother goddess. Fantastic story that you all should learn about, because it's at the root of the Eleusinian mysteries and some of the greatest devotions that we actually have literature for. And a fun fact, Orpheus died at the hands of Maenads that was angry because he was celibate, and they ripped him apart. Maenads being the devotees of the female devotees, they became ecstatic worshippers of Dionysus, and it's said that his head was thrown into a river and continued singing and proclaiming beautiful poetry. Then we've got the Chaldean oracles, which are incredible texts from the Roman period, said to have been produced by the two Julians, a father and son couple, pairing, bringing through oracles and working theurgy, divine rituals in order to communicate with the gods. Said to have its origins in Chaldea, kind of being brought by them through, we don't know the truth, but what we do know is that from around 200 CE, this text was distributed very widely. It had a huge impact on the then Roman worship of the gods. It spread everywhere. The Neoplatonists took it up, and it became a very important source text for them. Unfortunately, the original texts have all been destroyed, and efforts have been made to put it together where it's been quoted, because it's been quoted so elaborately by so many other writers. In it, the goddess Hekate plays a really important role. She's the primary goddess, one could say, and she is often speaking for herself. And in this particular quote, she says, "I come, a virgin of varied forms, wandering through the heavens, bull-faced, three-headed, ruthless, with golden arrows, chase Phoebe, bringing light to mortals." And then she goes on to talk about some of her symbols. So we can learn from this language, and we can learn from the literature and the images and become more fluent in the language of the symbol of this goddess, but also all the deities that we encounter. She also declares that she's a goddess in full armor with weapons, and we find these kind of ideas that she was fighting with her torches in the battle against the giants, and she was said to sometimes lead a host of soldiers into battle as well. This is a rare thing, but it does exist, and she's leading and protecting, and this role that she has, because fire, in addition to protecting, can also, of course, be used as a weapon. You find that in this papyri, she specifically said Isis was called Hekate in Cailleach. We can understand that because of those depictions from Thrace, but we can also find evidences where there's inscriptions of the two names being merged and syncretized together. In this Gnostic Christian text, we've got an example of Hekate both being assimilated into the new religion of the Pistis Sophia, a kind of ancient Gnostic Christian text. She's being assimilated, an attempt is being made. She's being made one of the archons, but she, at the same time, is being demonized. She is powerful, but she's one of the baddies. So we can read this and understand that the perspective of this is not that of a devotee, it's the perspective of somebody coming and following a new religion and wanting to still keep Hekate there because she's powerful, but kind of being wary of her. Likewise, Hippolytus, putting together a compendium of Christian writings, he really demonized Hekate, and he also, frankly, demonizes the Gnostics. And he, again, if you read this, he calls by some things that we're familiar with, the crossroads, the light bearer, but he also kind of emphasizes her darker aspects, her more chthonic aspects. He really wants people to see her as something to not go very close and to dispose of nearly. If you read these words, they are not the words of a devotee. Then Porphyry, who was a polytheist, Hellenic polytheist, writing around the same time, he's writing about her in a much more positive light. The goddess of the golden sandals and the white robe and the new moon and the full moon, the cultivation of crops. So very, very different kind of perspective when in the same era we're comparing the texts produced by other religious followers and that of Hellenist polytheist worshippers of the mother goddess and Hekate. In the Greek magical papyri that starts emerging about a century later, we've got lots of little snippets of magical and esoteric spells and rituals that have survived, and the whole body of these texts are called the Greek magical papyri. In it, Hekate is mentioned more than any other goddess, alongside Apollo and Hermes and also Selene. She is called on many times, and we can again garner information about her being three-faced, and hear that she's horned, but that she is also accompanied by bodies with the face of a dog and with a goat. This animalistic primordial shape of Hekate becoming prominent for some people at that time. Proclus, writing in the 5th century, at this time Christianity is well established already, but he is still writing hymns to Janus, the double-headed god of entranceways, and to Hekate, who we've seen already has that role, and he calls her the many-named mother of the gods. His children are fair, and again emphasizing her as a goddess of the threshold. Here we've got the writings of Nonnus. He was a polytheist who converted to Christianity, but we can see this kind of conflation of Selene, the moon, and Hekate, and again, things that are very beautiful and evocative, describing what she's holding and how she was seen. This text may have been based on the Chaldean oracles from a few hundred years before, because it really fits in with that genre. It talks about her emitting a life-generating word. It's a ceremonial tool called a Lyinx, and also a strophalis that was swung and made a sound that was used in conjunction with theurgic rituals to Hekate and theurgic in general as well. And really kind of emphasizing that Hekate, who they in the Chaldean oracles put as the soul of the world, had this life-generating essence to her. We're jumping forward 1,000 years or so to this image showing Hekate standing at a crossroads, which you can see in here, in an alchemical drawing from the 16th century, and she's got the heads of a pig, dog, and horse in this image. Then we find Edmund Spenser, the same kind of 16th century, writing about Hekate in a way that's very similar to what we find nearly at this point 2,500 years before in the writings of Hesiod, again highlighting her associations with the realms and Jove, of course, being the equivalent of Zeus. Shakespeare was very, very fond of Hekate and he mentions her many, many times. She pops up in a lot of his texts. In this particular text from Midsummer's Night's Dream, he equates her to the Queen of the Fairies, who in Scotland, of course, was Diana, but Hekate is also mentioned in that role, because Hekate and Diana, as I've said before, their worship is very intertwined, very similar to each other, and very conflated at times. At times it's impossible to know whether they were really separate deities. Then going to the 20th century, and we come to the works of Aleister Crowley. And here I need to pause. Aleister Crowley was probably the most famous and influential writer of the early 20th century for the occult. But not only that, his work continued to be highly influential on traditions like Wicca, where his words even find it into the famous text of the Charge of the Goddess, and a kind of mishmash of ways. An analysis of that is available on my website if you're interested, actually, line by line, if you want to know where the text came from. But I digress, and we've got little time. So Aleister Crowley's work influenced pretty much all the kind of revivalist traditions subsequent to him, not just the Ordo Templi Orientis, the OTO that was formed in his name, but also Wicca by Joel Gardner and later Alexander's Wicca. And people continue to go back to him. People still continue to go back to him as a source of authority. And as such, his work has been quoted and reused in so many ways that often it's been adapted and morphed into something slightly new, but still recognizable if you're familiar with the original text. But the original context has been lost. And as we've seen throughout the ages, all the depictions I've shown you show a woman of an indeterminate age, a mature woman. She's not old, she's not young. She's a woman in the prime of her life, if you like. She's of course not a woman, she's a goddess, which makes her immortal, and the rules of aging does not apply to the gods in the same way that it does to us. But Crowley had a strange relationship with Hekate. He wrote this text in his work Orpheus. He wrote a hymn to Hekate, which is not actually all that bad. But Aleister Crowley, who's named as one of the top 100 Britons of all time, and we've got to thank him for his influence on the development of the goddess movement, but we don't have to continue repeating the things he said. And this is what he said just 22 years later. He said, and thirdly, she is Hekate, a thing altogether of hell, barren, hideous, and malicious, the queen of death and evil witchcraft. Hekate is the crone, the woman past all hope of motherhood, her soul black with envy and hatred of happier mortals. So, two things. This quote is from a novel he wrote called Moonchild, and so you do need to go and see it in the context of a work of fiction where Hekate is something slightly different. And also the fact that Crowley liked to shock, and he liked to kind of play with words. He's a very clever man. But although I'm not a big fan, but I can find myself to say thank you for the work you did, Mr. Crowley. It really kind of put a lot of us, known and unknowingly, in touch with the goddess traditions and things, even though your work might sometimes be invisible within that. However, I don't thank you for this, because this becomes the source text for people actually naming Hekate as a crone goddess, even if she's not depicted as such, even if she was not described as such. She does have an association with the underworld. She did have an association with the restless death and with magics of all sorts. But this is an unfair description. In fact, this is the description that makes some of the texts that we saw earlier written by Christian writers trying to demonize her look quite tame in comparison. I don't know what was going on in Crowley's head when he wrote this, but over the last nearly 100 years, this text has been used to call Hekate a crone. It's been repeated and then quoted and then kind of slotted into the Robert Graves' fictional work, The White Goddess, which is very beautiful and evocative, in which Graves purports the idea of the triple goddess, the maiden, the mother, and the crone. In the triplicity of Hekate with Persephone and Demeter, which is where she does form a trio of goddesses that are often depicted together, it is true that Persephone starts off as the maiden goddess and becomes a queen. It is true that Demeter means Holy Mother and that she's the Grain Goddess and she's the mother of Persephone in that story. But Hekate is still described in that story as being a maiden goddess, as being bright coiffed. She's depicted as a young woman with her torches leading and preceding and guiding Persephone into and out of the underworld, out of the world of Hades every year, so that summer can come and so that winter will come when she descends again. She keeps that balance. She's the intermediary, but she's not depicted as an old figure. Age is just not relevant to these depictions. It is Demeter in that story, and if you don't believe me, go and read the entire text of the Homeric hymn to Demeter. It clearly tells that story in there. It's a beautiful and evocative and very important text for any of us interested in the deities of the Mediterranean, the Aegean, of Greece and Anatolia. And it is Demeter that when she's mourning for her daughter, puts on the guise and the clothing of an old woman as she wanders around with mortals. But Demeter, again, sheds off that clothing and becomes herself and presents as a deity again when the time comes for her to reveal herself in that story. Hekate was never the crone goddess. There are deities that fits that. If you're looking for one within the context of the Eleusinian mysteries and the stories of Demeter and Persephone, look at Balbo. She's the goddess a little bit like a Sheila Negig that reveals a yoni to make Demeter laugh, similar to that story of Hathor, if you're more familiar with the Egyptian myths. So I don't believe that Hekate presents herself as a crone to everybody, but it is possible that a goddess with a history of so many thousands of years, a goddess that's taken on so many different forms and shapes and names, could have created a form of a crone in the 20th century through the work. Maybe Aleister Crowley was just a vessel for her to present this to the world, to become a gateway so that people would go and explore her and find her on the other side of that gate, to find her deeper mysteries, her longer history, which is not really about age. It's about the function she held. It's about the power that she represented for independent women. So please look at the whole history and make up your own mind. If you would like to go with these words of Aleister Crowley, of course, that's fine. It might be a gateway for you to Hekate. She's a fantastic, powerful goddess who stands in her own power. In my opinion, she doesn't need a man to tell her what she should look like, which is what I personally see this as a little bit. So we shall go and end this presentation with this modern mosaic at the entranceway of Stratonikeia, her city. The archaeological site is now open. You can go and visit it. They're doing a lot of work there to reveal what went on. The city, like I said before, was connected with a sacred way to the Temple of Hekate at Lagina. And if you ever find yourself in that region of Turkey, take the time, go and see. Really, a lot more will likely be uncovered in the coming years. Thank you so much for listening to me. I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation. I hope that you could feel my passion for this goddess, and that if you have any questions, you're very welcome to contact me through social media or by email, which is on my website. Thank you so much, everybody. Blessed be.